What happens when a royal sits down for one of America's most prestigious interviews and walks out in anger? Prince Harry's highly anticipated 60 Minutes conversation with Anderson Cooper began with charm and calm control. But as the questions cut deeper, the composure shattered. This wasn't just an interview. It became a slow, burning collision between a battle-tested journalist and a defiant prince, unraveling live into one of the most explosive walkouts in modern television history. The studio looked simple, almost too simple. 2 chairs, a small table, one key light dropping a sharp beam over the set, while the rest of the room sank into quiet shadows. There was no audience, no applause, just the unmistakable stillness of 60 Minutes. Anderson Cooper leaned forward, with his trademark calm, and extended his hand. "Harry, thank you for joining us." His voice carried warmth, but also a weight that made the air feel heavier. Prince Harry shook the hand, but answered shortly, his shoulders a little stiff, his jaw tight. It was a polite exchange, yet something in his body language hinted this wasn't going to stay polite for long. Anderson began gently, asking about tradition. Isn't there comfort in the stability of it? A sense of unity? Harry's lips curled into a smirk. Comfort? For who? Tradition is nothing but a cage with pretty wallpaper. It keeps the cracks hidden, but it doesn't change what's rotting inside. The words landed hard. Anderson didn't flinch. He pressed again, framing it differently. Many still see it as a symbol that holds the country together. Do you really think it has no value at all? Harry leaned forward, his tone sharper now. Value to those who sit on golden thrones, maybe. But to me, it's a prison, a fairy tale built to keep people quiet. For the first time, Harry cut Anderson off mid-sentence, his voice riding over the question. In the control room, a producer whispered through IFB, "Mark that talkover." The crew exchanged quick glances, sensing the shift. Anderson shifted in his chair, pen resting on his notepad. "You've said many times that privacy matters to you," he began, voice calm but firmer now. "But you've also chosen to share certain parts of your life. Your book, the Netflix series, even this interview. Isn't that selective?" As he spoke, the lower third graphic appeared on screen, showing a direct quote from Harry's own memoir. "I chose to tell my story because otherwise others would tell it for me." It was a standard fact-check move, the kind of visual receipt 60 Minutes often used to ground tough questions. Harry's eyes narrowed the moment he saw the quote appear under him. His jaw set, and he gave a sharp laugh, more defiant than amused. "Control isn't hypocrisy," he shot back. "It's freedom. Privacy doesn't mean silence. It means I decide what's mine to give and what's not. That's the difference you'll never understand." He leaned forward as he spoke, his shadow cutting deeper under the key light. In the control room, the director's voice buzzed through the headsets. "Hold on the graphic. Stay on the quote. Okay? Now cut back." Tight close-up, Harry. The camera zoomed in, filling the frame with his face, every flicker of irritation captured in high detail. The tension was climbing, and the interview had only just started to burn. Anderson's tone softened as he shifted the conversation. "You've spoken about protecting your children. But some would say you've placed them in the spotlight too, only on your own terms. How do you reconcile that?" The question hung in the air. Harry didn't blink. His reply came cold and flat. "I decide. No one else." As he crossed his arms, the tiny microphone clipped to his jacket rustled against the fabric. The sound wasn't loud, but in the silence of the studio, it was sharp enough to make the crew wince in their headsets. It was the kind of unplanned noise that only added to the tension, like static before a storm. From the control room, the producer's voice came quick and low over the IFB. "Anderson, keep calm. Don't push too hard yet. Next question. Balance." Anderson gave the smallest nod, keeping his eyes locked on Harry. The set was still, the air thick, as if everyone knew they had just crossed an invisible line. Anderson leaned forward, his tone even but sharper now. "Every leader I've interviewed, every veteran who's walked in here, even presidents under fire, they all had one thing in common: humility." His eyes stayed steady, the words chosen carefully. Harry didn't hesitate. He shook his head with a dismissive smile. "Humility is for people still begging for approval. I don't need that. I've earned the right to speak without bowing to anyone." The words landed like a slap, colder than anything he'd said before. The room went dead quiet. 3 long seconds of silence stretched out, so heavy that even the faint breath of the boom operator leaked into the room tone. The cameras held on Harry, the key light throwing a harsher shadow across his face. Anderson didn't smile this time. He scribbled a note, his expression harder now, the warmth from earlier gone. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. The journalist's patience had thinned, and the interview had just climbed to the next level. Anderson's tone shifted slightly, careful but deliberate. "Harry, let's talk about Meghan. You've spoken many times about love, about protecting her, and about the unfair weight of the media. But do you think her presence has pulled you further from your family?" His words were slow, chosen carefully, but the crew knew this was the landmine. Harry's eyes flashed immediately. He leaned forward, the smile gone. "There it is. Always Meghan. You people can't stop. Journalists like you drag her into everything because it sells. You don't care about her. You don't care about us. You care about clicks and ratings." His voice rose a notch, sharp enough that even the boom operator adjusted his mic. Anderson didn't flinch. His pen hovered over the notepad, but he didn't write. Instead, he just looked at Harry, letting the silence underline the accusation. The crew shifted slightly, exchanging glances. The air felt different now, heavier. Everyone in the room knew they had crossed into dangerous territory. Anderson leaned in, his voice quieter now, but with an edge that cut straight through. "Harry, let me ask you plainly. When was the last time you looked in the mirror and asked yourself if maybe it's not the monarchy, not the press, maybe it's you? That maybe this defensiveness has become your identity?" The words landed like a hammer. Harry's smirk returned, but it looked thinner, more forced. "I don't need mirrors," he said coldly. "I live how I want. I answer to myself, not to you, not to anyone else." He sat back, arms crossed, but the defiance in his tone carried a tremor underneath. And then, the studio betrayed the tension. From the control room desk, a laminated receive card slipped loose and slid across the floor, the scraping sound echoing in the silent set. A production assistant rushed forward to grab it, but the interruption only made the silence heavier. No one moved. No one spoke. The air felt brittle, like it could shatter. The director's command whispered into the headset. "Hold. Stay close." "Don't cut." Camera B zoomed in even tighter, capturing Harry's face. And that's when it happened. A single swallow, quick and nervous, breaking the mask. It was barely visible, but on screen, magnified under the key light, it was undeniable. The prince who had spoken with fire just seconds ago suddenly looked cornered. Anderson saw it. The crew saw it. And for the first time, the audience at home would too. The rhythm of the interview stuttered for the first time. A producer at the edge of the set raised his hand, signaling for a 20-second hold to swap the dying IFB battery. The director's voice slipped through the earpieces. "Stand by, quick reset." but Harry shook his head sharply, his voice cutting across the studio. "We keep rolling." His tone wasn't loud, but it carried authority, a warning that stopping would mean losing control. From the far side of the studio, Harry's PR handler lifted a hand, discreet but clear. The signal was simple. No Diana questions. A universal sign in the media world, as plain as it was desperate. Anderson glanced down at his question card. The next line was bolded, waiting for him like a lit fuse. He hesitated just long enough for the crew to catch it on camera, a flicker of doubt, before sliding the card back into his lap. His face stayed neutral, but everyone watching could sense the calculation. The production assistant, who had just scrambled to pick up the dropped card from earlier, backed into the wings. The studio door didn't close fully, left slightly ajar. The thin strip of hallway light cut across the set, adding a strange sense of exposure. It felt like someone might be watching from just beyond the frame. The room was already tense, but now it felt unsettled, unsafe, as if the next step would change everything. Anderson finally leaned forward, his tone soft, but heavy with intention. "Harry, your mother, Princess Diana, she became more than a royal. She became a symbol because of her honesty and the way she connected with people. Do you feel that you carry that legacy?" The words were delivered with care, almost gentle, but they landed like a blade. The camera operator switched to a split diopter shot. Harry in the foreground, Anderson blurred just behind him, both faces sharp in the same frame. It was a visual collision, two men locked in one picture, no room for escape. Harry's reaction was instant. His voice cracked like thunder. "Don't! Don't use my mother as a prop for your little broadcast." His chest heaved as the words spilled out, louder than anything before. The room froze. Crew members held their breath. No one dared move. In the control room, the director gave the order. "Ready, graphic 2, timeline coverage of Diana." A producer's finger hovered over the button. But then, after a tense pause, the director snapped, "Cancel. Hold raw." The screen stayed locked on Harry's fury. No graphics, no safety net, just unfiltered emotion. The gamble was clear. This moment was too real, too raw, to dilute with a graphic. The silence after Harry's outburst was heavier than any sound. The sacred name had been spoken, and the ground beneath the interview cracked wide open. Anderson's patience finally cracked. His eyes no longer carried that calm neutrality. He leaned in, his voice lower but sharpened like a blade. "What I see here isn't courage, Harry. It's entitlement." The line landed heavy, not as a question, but as a verdict. For the first time, Anderson had stopped playing the journalist. He had become the judge. Harry stiffened, the smirk gone, his jaw clenched tight, eyes narrowing with open fury. He leaned forward, voice rising. "You don't get to define me. You don't get to sit there and label me like I'm one of your case studies." His words came fast, almost spitting, as if each syllable was a defense against being cornered. The air in the room shifted. A boom operator adjusted nervously, the microphone trembling just enough to pick up the faint hitch in Harry's breathing. The focus puller twisted the ring as Harry leaned closer to Anderson, the lens breathing into a sharper, almost suffocating frame. On screen, the edges of the picture seemed to tighten, as though the walls themselves were closing in on both men. Anderson didn't move back. His pen lay forgotten on the notepad, his eyes locked on Harry like a spotlight that refused to blink. Around them, no one dared break the silence. Not the crew, not the control room. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but charged, buzzing, waiting for someone to strike the next blow. At that moment, the set felt smaller, darker, and hotter. Not just two men in an interview, but two forces trapped in a cage, with nowhere left to step except straight into collision. From the corner of the studio, Harry's PR rep raised a hand, cutting through the tension with a sudden signal. It wasn't subtle. The meaning was clear. Stop the interview, or at the very least, get control. A few seconds later, a producer leaned into the director's headset. They're demanding approval rights on the edit. It was a familiar request in PR-heavy interviews, but one that directly violated the DNA of 60 Minutes. The control room lit up. A legal counsel patched in over the intercom, voice flat, absolute. No prior approval. Policy on editorial independence. If they walk, but we don't hand over edits. The lawyers had drawn the line. The crew exchanged glances. This was no longer just an interview. It was a standoff. Anderson's pen rested motionless on his notepad as he straightened in his chair. He didn't wait for the off-camera negotiation. Instead, he spoke directly into the moment, his voice steady but firm. For the record, our guests do not approve or control the final cut at 60 Minutes. That's the standard. That's the policy. The words weren't just for Harry. They were for every viewer at home, a declaration of journalistic authority. Harry's jaw flexed, his teeth pressing together so tightly that the muscle along his cheek twitched. His eyes burned with a mix of anger and disbelief. This wasn't the deal he had imagined, not the battlefield he thought he controlled. The trust, fragile from the start, now cracked completely. What had been a tense conversation had just become open war. In the control room, a producer's hand hovered over the console. "Ready package. Roll in 5, the director started, preparing to cue a pre-cut clip that pieced together Harry's past interviews and sound bites. The screen in the studio briefly flashed a freeze frame, waiting for the roll. For a second, it looked like Anderson was about to hit Harry with the ultimate checkmate. His own words played back against him. But Anderson didn't give the signal. He raised his hand slightly and shook his head. "Hold it," he said calmly into his mic. Then he turned back to Harry, his voice clear enough for everyone in the room and every viewer at home to hear. "I want to hear it from you, not from tape. Not from a package. Right here, right now." The choice was deliberate. No safety net, no clips, just raw confrontation. Harry's eyes narrowed. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Of course you do. You people survive by recycling drama. You package it, you spin it, and then you call it truth. Without that, what are you?" "Nothing." The jab was direct, dripping with contempt. Anderson leaned in, his face unshaken, his tone cutting with surgical precision. "And yet, here you are, Harry. Sitting in this chair, feeding that very cycle. You call it exploitation, but you're the one providing the fuel. If this is just recycled drama, then you're the supplier." His words hit like a hammer, leaving no exit from the logic. The studio went silent again, the unrolled package still waiting in the system. Everyone knew the clip would have been damning, but holding it back made the confrontation even more dangerous. Two men, no edits, no buffers, just a clash live to camera. Anderson finally leaned back, his pen resting still on the pad. He didn't look down anymore. His eyes locked on Harry, and his voice carried the weight of someone who had been waiting for this moment all along. "Let's take a step back," he began, calm but with an edge sharp enough to cut the silence. "From the very start, you've told us privacy is your shield, but in truth, you've used it as a sword. You've insisted on control, even as you've demanded freedom. You've spoken of family, but only to show how you've broken away. You brush aside questions about the future, because it's safer than committing to anything real. And when humility comes up, you dismiss it entirely. Each phrase dropped with precision, like stepping stones leading Harry into a corner. Anderson paused deliberately. The air in the studio was thick. Even the lights seemed to hum louder. "Do you see the pattern, Harry?" he said, his voice steady, almost quiet. "You want to be heard, but you don't want to listen. You want every microphone, every camera, every stage, but the moment you're challenged, you shut the door. That isn't strength. That isn't survival. That is the contradiction that follows you everywhere you go." The silence that followed was suffocating. A camera operator wiped sweat from his forehead, though the studio wasn't hot. The boom mic trembled slightly as the operator steadied his hands. From the control room, the director's whisper cut into the headsets. "Dutch tilt. Just a degree." The frame shifted almost imperceptibly, the horizon line bending. Viewers at home wouldn't know why their stomachs tightened. They'd just feel the imbalance creeping into the picture. Harry's jaw tightened, his lips pressed into a thin line, but no words came. Instead, his fingers started drumming against the armrest. 1 tap, 2 taps, 3. Each hit sharp enough to be picked up faintly on the mic, like a metronome counting down. Crew members exchanged nervous glances. To them, it wasn't just a tick. It was a warning, a fuse burning down to its last second. Anderson didn't move. He sat still, eyes locked, waiting. The entire room knew it. The next words, the next breath, would decide if this interview collapsed or exploded. Harry shot up from his chair with a sudden force that made the entire set jolt. The legs of the heavy chair scraped across the studio floor, a long, screeching sound that tore through the silence. Crew members flinched instinctively. The boom operator jerked his mic back just in time to avoid Harry's shoulder, his headset filling with static from the sudden movement. As Harry yanked at his microphone pack, the cord snapped free, the wire whipping against the edge of the table with a sharp crack. The sound echoed through the studio, louder, harsher, more violent than anything anyone had said. It was the kind of noise you couldn't edit out, the kind that left a mark. Camera B instinctively started to pan, tracking Harry's storming figure as he moved toward the exit. "Follow him?" the operator whispered into his mic. In the control room, the director hesitated for a beat, then barked into the headsets. "Do not follow. Hold position. Stay on Anderson." The frame froze back on the anchor, the decision anchoring the chaos in discipline. Harry ripped the mic from his collar and hurled it onto the chair he had just abandoned. The door at the far end of the studio groaned as he shoved it open, the hallway light spilling across the set before it slammed shut behind him. The reverberation rolled like thunder, and then silence. Anderson didn't move. He didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly turned his gaze from the empty chair to the camera lens, locking eyes with millions of viewers at home. His voice, steady as steel, cut through the air. "Sometimes the hardest truth to hear is the one that cuts closest to the bone." The control room stayed frozen. The crew barely breathed. On the monitor, Anderson filled the frame, calm against the storm that had just walked out. It wasn't just an interview anymore. It was history, caught raw, live, and unflinching. The moment the studio door slammed behind Harry, the control room erupted. Voices overlapped through headsets, the calm precision of live broadcast replaced by a rush of panic. "Do we roll straight? Cut to black? Clean it up?" one producer snapped. The team split instantly into 2 camps, half arguing to air the walkout raw, the other demanding they trim it into something more polished. It was no longer just about Harry and Anderson. Now the fight was over what millions of Americans would see. A legal counsel patched in immediately, voice clipped and steady. Air it as is, unedited, but frame it with context in the anchor intro. It's still fair, it's still balanced. We cannot be accused of manipulation. The words carried weight. This was about protecting not just the story, but the network itself. From the Standards and Practices desk, another voice cut through. Lower third copy needs to be neutral. No sensationalism. Avoid words like meltdown or explosive. Keep it straight. The clip is powerful enough on its own. Don't let the headline taint it. On the monitors, the crew could see Harry's empty chair still frozen in the shot. A silent image that already spoke volumes. The debate grew louder until the executive producer stepped forward, slamming a hand down on the console to silence the chatter. His face was set, the decision firm. We keep the long take. No cuts, no pans. Add context after the fact, but the audience sees exactly what happened. Unbroken. That's our integrity. That's the story. The room went quiet. The call was made. The monitor feed lingered on Anderson's still frame, his eyes locked to camera, the ghost of Harry's walkout echoing behind him. In that moment, the control room wasn't just directing a show. They were deciding how history would remember it. By the time the broadcast wrapped, social media had already detonated. The sound of Harry's chair dragging across the studio floor, harsh, metallic, uncut, was ripped, looped, and turned into a viral meme within minutes. TikTok remixes dropped it over drum beats. YouTube Shorts titled it, "The Royal Scrape Heard Around the World." Twitter trended with a single tag, #walkout60. Some framed it as defiance, others as collapse, but everyone was watching. Across the Atlantic, the Royal Press Office held to a tight script. The official line was a flat, no comment, yet off-record. Whispers slipped into the hands of sympathetic columnists. Harry had been provoked. The interview was a trap. The network had crossed lines of dignity. The story played both ways, publicly silent, privately spinning. In New York, rival newsrooms seized their opening. By midnight, one outlet published a piece citing sources familiar with the negotiation, revealing that Harry's team had demanded approval rights over the final cut before walking out. Screenshots of emails surfaced, stamped with time codes. The leak poured gasoline on an already burning fire. Meanwhile, Anderson Cooper returned to air with a short, controlled address. His tone was calm but firm. To our viewers, I want to say this: interviews are built on trust and honesty. Tonight, that trust broke on camera. We regret the walkout, but we stand by the questions. That is our duty, and it will remain our standard. The words locked the message. The network wouldn't bend, wouldn't apologize for pressing hard. The echoes kept rolling. Memes, headlines, royal gossip, newsroom leaks. But in the center of it all, one image remained fixed in the public's mind. Anderson steady in his chair, staring down the lens, while the empty seat beside him screamed louder than anything Harry had said. Weeks later, the moment still lingered. In classrooms for journalism, professors replayed the footage as a case study in tension, truth, and collapse. Media blogs dissected every frame, the scrape of the chair, the mic snapping, the silence that followed. For some, it was a symbol of Harry's defiance. For others, it was a portrait of a man cornered by his own contradictions. Inside the halls of Buckingham Palace, aides treated it like a wound that couldn't be ignored. They spoke of another Diana moment, but this time not one that inspired sympathy. Instead, it left the royal family split between those who wished Harry would fade quietly into private life, and those who feared he had become too loud to silence. Anderson Cooper's closing words, "The hardest truth is the one that cuts closest to the bone," circulated far beyond the show. They appeared in editorials, on protest signs, even etched into memes. What was supposed to be just another high-profile interview had mutated into something else entirely. A cultural moment that blurred the line between journalism, theater, and history. Years from now, people won't remember the details of Harry's answers, or even the questions Anderson asked. They'll remember the scrape of the chair, the frozen camera on Anderson, and the walkout that turned into a legacy. Because in the end, it wasn't just a clash between a royal and a journalist. It was a reminder that power, pride, and truth can never sit comfortably in the same room for long. If this walkout stunned you, tell us in the comments. Was it defiance or defeat? Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next unbelievable showdown.